Hi, my name is Arun Iyer. I am a PhD student at IIT Bombay, and I have the esteemed privilege of giving you a talk just before lunch. And I've been told that the best talk before lunch is always the one that finishes on time, so I will try to do that. I'll try to explain the parts, class ratio estimation, as well as privacy preserving. And in the next few slides, I will explain both these concepts and what do I mean by privacy preserving in this case. The problem essentially began when we started analyzing, can we do data analysis on predictor variables of data? For example, we have done analysis on known data, but can we do analysis on the unknown columns based on what we already know? And the class ratio estimation problem that I'm going to describe is the simplest form of the analysis that one can think of. So I'll just briefly describe what the problem is. Class ratio estimation says that essentially we have an unlabeled data, U, and some k classes that it can have. For each class, you would like to know how many instances in the unlabeled data belong to each class. That's what we mean by class ratio estimation. And I have described what the output should be for our system. I haven't described what the inputs are for the system. The inputs are as follows. We are given sets of instances, and we are also given proportions of labels in each of those sets. We are not given instance level labels. That's the setting that I'm going to work with. And I'll give a motivation for where this thing is coming from, right? The problem starts from election prediction. The three names that you see, Bihar, Assam, Tamil Nadu, are three states in India. And the boxes that you see are samples of people from those states. And the three colors that you see are three major political fronts in India. For simplicity, I will simply refer to them as orange, white, and green, which makes it easier for us. And the block sizes of the colors indicate what fraction of the people in each of these states voted for these parties, right? Now, our goal is this. Let's say this is another state in India, and all these three elections happened in 2016, and the one that I'm showing you right now is going to happen in 2017. And I would like to predict what fraction of people in Maharashtra are going to vote for which party. So this is a prediction problem. Given the election results of the states of Bihar, Assam, and Tamil Nadu, can we predict the election results of Maharashtra? So the base case, the simplest way to think about how to solve about this problem is A, learn a classifier. Second, the problem is this. The assumptions made by most classifiers are that the training data and the test data must have an IID representation. This is quite restrictive, right? First of all, if you look back at this figure, you will see that different proportions of people in each of those states have voted for different parties. Already, the training data doesn't have IID representation in anywhere, right? So the thing is, the IID assumption that a classifier requires is quite restrictive, and it increases the error in our estimation. And a classifier does best when the set sizes that you have are small and the number of sets that you have are large, right? Now, and both of these cases are not something that you want to do. Again, so one of the essential facts of elections are that the votes that you give are private. You are not supposed to figure out who voted for whom. And that's a private information. So it's not in our interest to actually learn a classifier in this particular case. And this is where we want to bring in privacy as well. And so here I would like to the one way to think about this, can we directly estimate the election results without having to learn a classifier? Can we do that? Turns out that the answer is yes, you can do that. And here is it. So I'll give you in the two parts. The first part is the estimation model. How do you go about doing the direct estimation of the election prediction in this case? And secondly, I will also talk about how to publish the data, the election results, with some privacy. The estimation model. First, we'll make a slightly relaxed assumption than the one that we have in classifier. We'll assume that the training and test data have identical class conditional distribution. What does this mean for the election case, right? In the simplest way, if I have to say, it says that similar people have similar voting preferences. It's not a bad assumption. It's a somewhat weak assumption, but it's not a terrible assumption. Now let's look at this simple equation. This is just marginalization. You have probability of x marginalized over the labels. But the thing to notice this, the probability of y that you see, they add up to 1. And the class conditional distribution probability of x given y we have as many class conditional distribution as there are labels. And each of those marginals is a convex combinations of those class conditional distributions. So here is the trick. If I have the class conditional distribution, if you think about the orange, white, and green labels that we had, then our unlabeled data that we have should lie. Since we have assumed that the train and test data have identical class conditional distribution, it should lie in the convex set formed by the class conditional distribution. Now, we know, based on our assumption, we know that the unlabeled data's distribution can be expressed as a convex combination of the class conditional distribution. This gives a very simple estimation problem. We'll simply minimize the distance between the unlabeled data distribution and the convex combination of those class conditional distribution. And the variable that minimizes this two must be the class proportion. Now, the question is this, do we have those class conditional distribution? We actually don't. So how do we go about doing this? What do we have exactly? So here is what we have. This is what we want, but what we have is, we have those samples from set 1, set 2, and set 3. They lie within the convex set. Again, this is because we have assumed that the training and test data have identical class distribution, which means they also must belong to the same convex set. So we have these 3 points lying in the same convex set, and we have the unlabeled data. Turns out, you can estimate again the class proportion again, which is very similar to how we did it before. You minimize the distance between the unlabeled data, and a linear combination of those sets are somewhat restrictive. We have to put some condition on unfile, but it is fine. And the prediction is that if you do take the class proportion of each set and use those coefficients, you can predict the class proportion. It's a very simple thing. So the intuition is very simple. Each of those S1, S2, S3 is also a convex combination of the corners, and the unlabeled data is also the convex combination of corners, which means that there is a simple way to correlate these coefficients with the class proportion. It's not very hard to see that. What distance measure to use? We use what we call as the maximum mean discrepancy measure. It's a very simple discrepancy. So if you look at the distance, I have replaced below the MMD version of it. It's a fairly new but fairly well-known kind of discrepancy measure. The good things about maximum mean discrepancy is that it is non-parametric, which means I don't have to have any parametric form of expression for the densities. Secondly, it is a simple distance measure which gives me a convex quadratic objective, which is very important because it's a very simple objective formulation. Secondly, MMD by design, this distance measure by design requires a universal kernel, which means just by using this distance measure, I am also inheriting the kernel method in my objective formulation, which is cool. Like, I'm getting the rich feature space for practically free. And using MMD has facilitated theoretical analysis of this objective. I can theoretically analyze how terrible my error estimation is. Error in my estimation is. So I'm not going to give you the expression of theoretical analysis, but I'm going to give some key ideas of how I went about the analysis, which is very straightforward, and I'm also give key insights that were obtained from the theoretical analysis. The key ideas of how you do the analysis is very simple. First of all, I have, as I said, because I'm using MMD, we are getting a convex quadratic objective function, which means that I can easily bound it. Strong convex objective functions can be easily bounded. And then I use simple concentration inequalities, which were again developed for MMD in a prior thesis by Lasong, and that just using these 2 steps gave me an error bound on my estimates. The key insights that are obtained, the first key insight that was obtained was the estimator is consistent. That is, if you increase your training data and test data, the error reduces. Secondly, estimates improve for larger set sizes. That is, if you increase the amount of instances in each set, your estimation improves. So third, estimates are lower if their sets are fewer. That is, I don't want large number of sets. I need as few sets as possible, and the minimum being the number of class labels that you have. Because as you know, you need at least 3 points to span the convex set of 3 classes, right? And estimates improve as the sets are skewed. That is, if the S1 and S2, S3, as they reach the corners, you get better and better estimates of your class ratios. So these are the key insights that one obtains just by doing the theoretical analysis, and these are good thing because we'll understand how they are useful for privacy. First of all, we'll compare the insights that we obtain through the analysis with what we know for classifier. So comparing with classification. Classifier-based approaches, it prefers smaller set sizes. We prefer larger set sizes. Classifier-based approach prefers large number of sets. MMD-based approach prefers smaller number of sets. Classifier requires IID data, and MMD-based requires a very relaxed assumption. We just need the training and test data to have identical class conditional distribution. And classifier-based approach improves with only the training data size, but it is agnostic to the test data size. But our estimator takes into account even the test data, which means if you increase the test data size, your estimation can improve, which is a very big thing, right? So MMD-based approach, first of all the things that you require for MMD-based estimation are deterrent to a classifier, which means that if you use MMD-based approach, nobody using a classifier can actually estimate it very easily, right? Because all things are almost antonym of the classifier-based approach. Still, we'll come to another point again, why we need the privacy part as well. So first of all, before I go to the privacy aspect, let's do a simple estimation analysis, like how well are we comparing with the classifier-based approach. Here we are comparing with the state-of-the-art PSVM, proportional SVM, that was developed by Yu et al. In ICML 2013. It's a binary classifier that can learn from sets of instances and proportion. It doesn't require instance level label. That is very important. And it is also kernel-based. Since our method is kernel-based, we require a competitive classifier there. So here is the comparison. So how we did what are we doing in this experiment? Is follows. We have a binary data set. The training data has proportion of 0.5, 0.5, and we vary the test set class proportion between 0.1 to 0.9, right? That's what we see in the x-axis. The proportion of the data goes from 0.1 to 0.9. And on the y-axis, I'm plotting the error in the estimation. Now here is the deal. The test set, when it's close to 0.5, the classifier, the red line, which is the SVM classifier, is doing quite well. But as the proportion, test set proportion differs from 0.5, the error is very high. That you can see as the non-IID errors are very high from a classifier. But MMD-based approach, the purple line that you see, is fairly constant. Regardless of what proportions you have in your test set, it's doing fairly consistently throughout. And this is the result that you will see almost in all data sets that we have. Now that we have done with the estimation model, I will go with the privacy part. So again, why do I need privacy? Here, first of all, we need to understand that we are talking about the election example. The sample population, the features may be obtained from somewhere else. So what is exactly getting published here as part of election are just the election results, the proportions, the QIs that are being published by the election commission. So if the election commission has to publish this result and has to maintain privacy, that means it has to add some noise to this election result so that nobody can actually learn from this data, right? So here is our goal. We would like to perturb those QIs sufficiently enough so that we are able to estimate properly on the unlabeled data, at the same time deter any person who wants to learn a classifier from it, right? We go with the more standard approach of publishing using the epsilon delta differential privacy. The idea is very simple. I am not explaining what the differential privacy here is. I'm just going to give you the method that we have utilized, and it's straightforward sort of. The eta I that you see here is defined as cardinality of Si into Qi. Qi are the class proportions. Cardinality of Si is simply the size of the sample, and eta I gives you the number of instances in each set that belong to each class, right? And what I'm doing is I'm simply instead of predicting Qi, we are asking the publisher to publish Q tilde I, which is a sample from the Dirichlet parameterized by sigma into eta I. And sigma is some scaling factor, okay? It's an arbitrary scaling factor that we have determined, calculated, so that we are satisfying the epsilon delta differential privacy condition, right? So this is a very simple idea. The calculation itself is somewhat tedious, calculating the sigma, but once you are able to get a sample, a Q hat I, which satisfies the epsilon delta differential privacy condition. Now this is not a new, this is a novel model, but this is not the only model that exists, and there are prior models that have been tailored for this purpose. But why have we actually come up with this new model in any way, right? So we will compare the different noise models just to get an idea of what is happening. The first is, so here are comparing four of the three popular noise models with our method. Our method is named as scaled Dirichlet, which is the purple line, and the other methods are in different colors, red, green, and blue. I hope it's a same color, right? Yeah, okay. And on the x-axis, we are varying the number of classes. And on the y-axis, we are measuring how much noise are we adding to existing class proportion that we know of. What we are observing is as the number of classes increase, the noise being added by the other models increases very, very high, whereas our method, the purple one, seems to be keeping at a very low rate, which is nice. We want the noise to be as low as possible so that our estimation is not affected, right? Here is another graph. The idea here is that we vary the epsilon component in the epsilon delta differential privacy, and we have fixed the delta at 0.05. The goal here is to understand whether there is large variance involved in the distortion. Is the distortion, like the average may be low, but if the variance is very high, your estimations are still going to go bad. And what we observe here is that the purple line still has very low variance, and its average is also low, its variance is also low, which is pretty good, right? Compared to other methods, particularly Gaussian performs quite terribly, given that its mean is also high and its very high variance. So here is the thing. We are observing small distortion, and we are also getting small variance. And the trick here is that there is, of course, a trade-off involved here that is not clear. Thing is, the trade-off here is that the privacy that we have utilized is aware of the size of the class. The other three methods, particularly Gaussian and Laplace method, are not aware of the size of the classes. And that is why the noise being added by those two methods are pretty high compared to our method. And that is the drawback of our approach, is that we require a certain minimum amount of samples within the sets. Otherwise, the privacy may be we may not be able to satisfy the epsilon delta privacy condition. Here is the good thing, though. You can do because our model privacy model is so simple, we can actually do a theoretical analysis of that privacy model again, and we will see that it prefers smaller number of sets as our estimation method does, and it also prefers large number of per class size, which is as the same as large number of set sizes, which is also same as the MMD estimation method, which means that this privacy model is kind of designed for our estimation purposes, right? And you will see that we do really well when we try to estimate with noise. So here is an example of where we have used MNIST data set with 10 classes, and the thing is that we are estimating here by adding noise to the training set proportion in the training data. And what we observe is that for different methods, particularly Laplace and Laplace prior, we have eliminated Gaussian from this picture because it was too bad. But even for Laplace and Laplace prior, you are actually seeing an error of roughly 0.5, which is very, very bad. And our method, the scaled Dirichlet method, which is the purple, is doing quite good. And how to measure it that it is quite good is by looking at the no distortion. The no distortion is the place where we have estimated without any noise. And we are seeing that the estimations made without any noise are quite close to the estimation that we have made even with noise. So as we see that the privacy model as well as the estimation method go hand in hand in this particular case. So in conclusion, We have an MMD-based class ratio method, which is the direct method. It avoids labeling each instance, which is what we want in our election prediction kind of scenario where voting is private. Secondly, it works in settings which are hard for classifiers to estimate from, which means that classifiers will find it very hard to get a good label with very high precision. And we have the scaled-Dirichlet privacy model that further guarantees, theoretically, with an epsilon delta differential privacy condition. In future, one can look at hybrid noise models. I talked about a few drawbacks in our approach where we have required minimum amount of sample in our data to be able to guarantee the epsilon delta differential privacy. It is quite possible that we may be able to work with a hybrid noise model where we can use some of the earlier models that we described along with our model so that we are able to cover the space of all possible epsilon delta differential privacy conditions. Secondly, I talked about where, the instances in the election prediction case are coming from third party which may be already published. So we didn't talk about privacy of instances, but it's quite possible that we can consider the privacy part where the instances are being published by the provider, and we want to consider privacy of the instances as well. So these are another kind of future work approach that one can think about. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
So any questions?
Cool, thanks for the talk. One really small thing I didn't quite get was the features that you're using, are they, in the voting example, are they at the level of individual voters but anonymized, or are they pre-aggregated to the level of states?
That's a nice question. Actually, they are user-level features, so they are not aggregated, but we are only looking for samples from the distribution. So they could be aggregated as long as they are representing the distributions.
Oh, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? If there's no question, let's thank the speaker again. And thank you for attending this section.